Welcome to Sword Analysis. I am Lord Clifford, your facilitator and presenter today. I've been fighting about 5 years. It's probably a little bit less than that because we've had 2 years of pandemic and I'm currently injured. So, 3 to 5 years. And I've gone through about 5 different swords in that time period. So about one a year on average, depending on how damaged they get and how much I'm willing to tape them up. And how easy it is to get retained.
I probably go through that many in a year.
Today we're going to cover a few things. So I'm going to do a little bit of analysis on the sword. So you can tell a lot about a fighter by just looking at their sword, weight, handle, where the shots are landing on the blade, things like that. And then how that sort of analysis translates to effective power transfer. We'll talk a little bit about construction of swords, and then what to do with your swords when they're pulped. Cool.
Make a room out of them, right?
Yeah. So, why sword analysis? You may think because we all use the same type of equipment, we all use rattan swords, and single-handed swords in this context.
No, we should all use rattan. I will not fight on with the sales guys.
But all swords would be similar, but that's not the case. You can actually tell a lot about a fire by looking at the sword. As I said before, see where the shots are landing, check edge orientations, balance point, thrusting tip, how the handle's been shaped, balance point, etc. And all of these things contribute to how effective you are as a fighter. Combination of shots, power transfer, etc. We'll go through most of these things today. Hopefully, I can impart one piece of information or something you didn't know. Today I'll learn this one thing. If I can get everybody to have one thing, that would be very good. If you have any questions, just ask. You don't think. Pretty fluid today, and they're pretty small. Okay. So the first thing we're going to look is care of your sword. So, when was the last time people sat down and actually looked at their sword? We usually turn up to training, you pull your sword out, you go straight into it.
Every time I have that fight, I should probably look at my sword before I fight.
Yeah, because there's a lot of time.
It's so good.
You see a lot of swords at training that probably wouldn't pass inspection. Things like exposed rattan, no edge tape, things like that. Any soft spots, any mushy bits, thrusting tips that are about to come off. If you can get them before the fight, so you don't thrust someone when it's come off. Pass it on. So I got a couple of different swords here. Most of these are mine. There's one of Sir Catan's here as well on that. But there's a lot of various. So if you have a feel of, say, this one for example, it's very, very light.
Have fun with that one, Bruce.
It's very, very light.
Makes you want to go.
And even if you compare it to this sword, which if you hold the two of them together, you can feel the difference. Grab both if you want. You don't have to. Yeah.
The immediate
Still light,
way
but
is
still
that
better.
someone has a much narrower hand because it's well curved, but they're going clunk
Small
on the
handle
top of
too.
my hand.
Yeah. Yeah. So
But yeah,
I find
and weight.
that weight is probably one of the first things you notice when you pick up a sword, someone's sword.
Yeah. You got a comparison?
Right?
Yep.
And I know that different people prefer different things, so there's pros and cons to each one. So a lighter sword means you can probably move it a bit faster or get tighter angles, but you might have a more difficult time transferring power that way because you've got to swing harder and put more effort into it. Versus a heavy sword, which may take less effort to get the right amount of power transfer, but you might be a bit slower or you might not be able to get as many angles and be able to beat certain defenses. And then there's the bits and pieces in the middle. Please come join. So I sort of could. No. So I sort of think of that if you've had a tennis ball and you've tried to throw a tennis ball as hard as you can throw your shoulder out or cause yourself, and because it's so light, you need to have a little bit of weight in it. So if you go too far to the extremes, you can cause issues. Same thing with a really heavy sword. You can give yourself
Permanent elbow damage.
Yes.
Oh, hey, Bruce, how are you?
I found I prefer a lighter stick for my style of fighting, for the types of shots I throw, and to help with certain injuries that I have.
By chance,
Yeah, I've had to
do you
lighten
have
up
your
my
thumb?
stick.
Do you have your thumb up when you fight?
No.
Why is that there?
Why is what there?
The rub mark on
Grounding,
my thumb.
grounding on thrusts.
Yeah.
Grip it like you do. Grip it like you do.
Probably from
Ground.
the half gauntlet.
Half gone to
Yeah,
ground.
it could be. I think with that handle is that the shaping goes really high up, so I think my hand might slide up a bit and it probably rubs a
Grounding
bit
and rubbing.
in there.
When you look at a lot of half gauntlets, they'll have a mark around.
Yeah, a wear point.
Some people foam disc it at the top.
So, if you prefer a lighter sword, how can you make your sword lighter? So, obvious things are planing down the sides of the sword. That removes material. You can use a shorter stick. Shorter stick has less weight. And you can also use different types of rattan. Some rattan that's been kiln dried.
Can you do it out?
Understand.
I don't. I'll need to get that to you.
Okay.
You can, but you can't fill it with mercury.
Yeah, you can't. You can't. So in the
Can't
rules,
put lead weights in it.
yeah, in the rules it says you can't do anything to make the sword harder, like coat it in PVA or anything like that. So I've got a couple examples, different ones here. So this one with the darker rattan has been, we think, kiln dried, and you can just feel it. It's so much lighter.
Stupid light.
It snaps.
Stupid light.
But they also
Hi,
break a lot
MFA.
easier.
Yeah. And this sword that I've made for Lady Granite is also of the same vintage, the same type. It's just
Okay.
light.
So Otto
It's
got
a wand.
whole bunch of these dark
We've got to slow this one down.
and they've all lasted like one bout.
Yeah.
You can't
Yeah.
fill them with helium either.
Yeah, so that's an examples of some lighter rattan. I don't really have a super heavy sword here today.
Should have said something. I could have brought one.
Yeah.
Or
I've
five.
actually got you as an example in here. So there's something down later. So
When you become subject
that's how we do. So there's a couple of different ways you can make the sword lighter. The type of rattan you use, removing material, either planing down the sides or making it shorter. How can you make a sword heavier if you prefer a heavier kind of sword? No. Legit. So Master Yanto up in Queensland actually has some weights attached to the bottom of his sword here to move the balance point down to help.
That's fine.
Yeah. So yeah, you can add weight. So you can not plane down the sides. You can have a longer sword. You can use a fatter piece of rattan. You can also use different types of basket hilts. So I've got a couple of different types of hilts here today. I've got just the standard SCA plastic basket hilt. These are about 500-600 grams in weight. These other ones that we're getting from Plastic Smith Armory now, they're about 750 or so. You wouldn't think that a couple of 100 grams makes a difference, but it does. It's quite noticeable. Like if you want this one sword with each, and you can kind of feel these ones are physically bigger as well, take up more space. And a couple of different types of metal basket hilts. So this one, I think, Circuit made. That one's 800 grams, I think. And this little one is from, I think, Mark Batchelor in WA.
Yeah.
It's about 650, 700.
My demo would not fit in that one.
My hand doesn't fit.
Yeah. I don't think my demo would fit in this one, to be honest.
Yeah.
Hi, Merv.
Right.
Merv makes these up in Brooklyn.
So, making your sword heavy, who knows what the maximum length for a one-handed sword is?
72 inches. No, that's too.
In metric?
Oh, no.
It's
no.
like 6 foot.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. The one-handed is ridiculous.
No. So
Yeah, it should be
in the handbook,
48 inches, I believe.
48.
it's 122 centimeters, whatever that is in inches.
Well, it's 2.5 centimeters to an inch, roughly.
About 46 inches.
Yeah.
12 inches is roughly what?
Now,
92
one-handed
centimeters.
swords have a maximum weight as well. Who knows what that is?
2.4 kilos.
Oh, you're very close.
2.5?
Lower.
Oh, 2.1.
Higher.
2.2.
2.27. That's what I've just pulled it
2.27.
straight out of the
Yeah,
handbook.
that's something.
But to get a one-handed sword to that weight, it's got to be pretty chunky with a big hilt on it.
I have one.
That's 5 pounds.
Okay,
I think.
nice boys. Calm down.
it's my comfort stick.
I know. I felt it.
Covered in.
So the point I'm trying to make with stick weight and that is that there's certain trade-offs. Yes, mate.
One another method of weighting up is you can put leather along the striking surface, because when we had the Siloflexes, it was told you had to have leather and tapes along the head. That's another easy way to quickly put weight on a light stick.
It's also like what Fish was saying. Like what his heavy sword is actually wrapped in rawhide.
Yeah.
Then has an edge on it. So.
And you've seen people use the webbing tapes as well. And another thing that can actually add a lot of weight to your sword without realising it is the actual tape. So if you retape your sword and you just go fibre tape over and you leave a layer on there, and then you retape it again and you take 2 layers off and put 3 on, then 2 on, and you can actually see this is one of my first swords, but you can actually see the rim of tape there, and that actually adds a fair bit of weight to your sword. It can change the distribution as well, particularly if you find that if you're the way some people repair their swords in the short is if they've got exposed rattan here, they'll just add an extra bit there, and if you've got a bit here, they'll add a bit there, and then you're adding extra weight, and it changes the weight distribution of the sword. So if you want that one there, you can see how much tape and weight on this one. There's also a lot of tape on this one because this piece of rattan was a skin-off piece of rattan, so it pulped up really easy. So I ended up taping it to try and
I haven't tried one of those.
That's the first stick that I ever made and used. That one. Still have my first stick.
Maybe too. It's not legal.
I don't.
Neither do I.
They're like trade-offs.
Oh, you soaked it into this one.
So, closely related to weight of the sword is balance point, right? So, different people have balance point. Some people prefer the balance point closer to the hilt. Some people prefer it closer to the tip in different styles. I know you, Darrell, have your weight towards the end of the sword because you like the tip. You just sort of let the tip do the work kind of thing for your fighting style. I prefer the weight in my swords closer to the handle because I found when the weight of the sword was towards the end, it was giving me a little bit of golfer's elbow on the inside there for my style of fighting at the time. I also found at the time that I felt like that was being aggravated when I was throwing wraps, that kind of motion. So I stopped throwing wraps for a while to let that heal up, and then I changed my sword. I got a metal basket hilt. I shortened my sword and moved the balance point back closer. But I've got the rollings that you've got there. The red sword. You can feel that with the balance points really close to the hilt in that one. So when you're balancing on your hand, you can kind of see where it is. So yeah, it can be useful for different things. Another thing that can also affect that is thrusting tips. There's a couple of different ways you can make thrusting tips. I prefer the sandwich method where you cut slabs with foam. Other people do the cinnamon scroll method, and then other people do other things where they put leather over the top of stuff and coming off and things like that. I found with the sandwich method on my swords, they tend to wear out at a certain point, which is that this corner of the front edge seems to wear out faster. I'm not sure why that is. I don't know whether it's the way I'm throwing shots or the way the thrusts are landing. I know you watch some people when they stand up, they do that and lean off their sword as well. That can wear your thrusting tips out. It's probably not good practice to do that because you can put dirt and things in people's eyes when you thrust with a dirty sword. So it's probably not.
That's why you always see me smack the side of my shield. Just to knock all that off.
Yep.
Talking about sandwich method, I use a heavier grade foam at the base, so coming off the end of the stick, and then lighter foam as I go out to give it. Hey? Because it gives it a progressive. When you thrust, it's got a progressive deepening of the impact required. So you can push in, and the thicker foam at the bottom stops it from bottoming. Yeah.
So how much progressive give do you need in a thrusting tip? Who knows off the top of their head?
This is doing 2 thumbs.
Oh, shit.
It's 20 mil. No, sorry, 10 thrusting tips have to be a minimum of 20 mil. You need 10 mil of progressive. Given
Half. half the length of
Yep.
the thrusting.
So what I didn't actually bring stuff. I've got some 12mm thick closed cell foam that I use in my helm padding that I use for thrusting tips. I use 2 layers of that. That gives me 24, but it's I think it's the density is a little bit thicker. Like it's more dense than your yoga mats and that. It's quite firm, and I found that gives me really good. Another thing with thrusting tips is when you lose one, if you're in a tourney on the wolf, you usually just rip them off and go again. A couple of things that people forget to do is sometimes they don't actually cover the top of their sword with tape. They've done the sides and then they put the thrusting tip on top. And the thrusting tips I've got that your sword's not legal because you got exposed to tape. Second thing is, as Gareth pointed out, is you're meant to sort of round the edges off, bevel them a little bit. So this is just an offcut I had, but I've just edged the belt. And you don't need much to do that. You can just find a bit of concrete, or if you I usually do it when I'm making my swords, when I'm shaping the handle on the sander, I just flip the tip over and just real quickly. So yeah, with the sandwich method, sometimes the thrusting tip, the first bit of foam moves around a little bit. So what I've been doing now is putting a little bit of double-sided tape down to hold it on the bottom, and then I take the first sandwich layer on, I go crosswise and around, then the sandwich one comes on, I go over and around. And that was to try and stop them coming off because, like I said, they wear through where they join the wood, so they're just extra reinforcing it. Again, adds a little more, maybe unnecessarily weight to the end of the tip, but I don't want my tip coming off in the middle of the tourney.
Do you know how to fix that?
No? What do you suggest?
Don't have a thrusting tip.
Learn how to cut.
I
know
knew where
you
you were going with that,
prefer
didn't I?
Do you have thrusting tip?
No, you don't. Because I fight, I don't fence.
I like to run through fighters with the end of my tip.
I'm not.
Crazy? You not doing crazy anymore?
I'm not a big thruster. I use them occasionally, particularly when people on their knees. But another reason that I like just having a thrusting tip there is that if you don't have a thrusting tip, you can't fake or feint a thrust. And those kinds of techniques, you see sometimes people they'll put their sword down here because they want to come up like that, or you see Leofric, he's got the one up here like this and you come down like that, or even throwing an offside and walking through. If you don't have a thrusting tip, those sort of options are not available to you at all. So you might not use it a lot, but like the threat of it being there is also very powerful.
It's a good counter against someone like Leofric because he does threaten with the tip so often. So if you interpose your tip, that takes him off his game, makes him do something different.
So we'll move on to blade analysis here. So this is the sword I used most recently, and what you can tell from looking at my sword is that a lot of my shots are landing sort of down here, not quite in the middle of the blade, but a fair way in from the top. What do you think that means? Well, first of all, where on the blade do you get the most effective power transfer?
All of it depends on where the balance point of your sword
Relative
is.
to buffness. Relative to buffness.
So, if you've ever played cricket or baseball or some sort of bat sport, if you smack a ball on the right on the tip, it sort of sends that shock up and it hurts. And then if you hit one right here, you can't get the full thing. So where you get the best transfer is sort of like this part of the sword on top. It's usually about a hand down from the top. This is where like the most effective transfer is. So what this tells me here is that a couple of things. I'm not utilizing my range effectively, so I'm a bit closer than I need to. I may not. There might be some shots that people might call light because I'm not transferring the power effectively. I might have hit someone cleanly, off armor or straight into a leg or a head or something, but because the power hasn't transferred properly, it might be called light, or it might be borderline. They say, not quite, kind of thing. And adjusting that, like that's only 5 or 6 centimeters. That's not, that's the difference between this and this, right? Like that's not a lot of play there. I got a couple of edges knocks down, or sort of off the blade line along this edge of the sword. That tells me I'm hitting like shields usually when you get those nicks. You can often see with knights, if you look at a sword of a knight, they have fewer of those because they kill people with less fewer shots. That's just anecdotal in my observations. I don't know if that's true across the kingdom, but that's just something. That's something I've noticed. And that can sort of rip your tape up a bit through their exposure tan if you're not careful. We're looking at the back of the sword. Sorry, the sides first. I haven't got many nicks down the side, which is good, which means I'm not hitting flat. But you can see from this sword that I haven't thrown many wraps with it. There's like 1, 2, 3 nicks in this one. That's because I only used this sword for the most recent crown tourney and the training day after it, so it's only been in 2 sort of training sessions. There's not a lot of nicks along the back. But that's really good to have a look at your blade, do a little bit of self-assessment. You know, am I throwing flat? And that can be a hard conversation to have if people point it out to, or you recognise it yourself. Because in our sport, we should be policing that, self-policing it first, realising what you're doing, and then if you receive feedback from your opponents or other fighters, is taking that on board and rectifying what you do. Can be a difficult thing to work through. I was going to ask if anyone had their sword here and would bring their sword up and we'd do a little bit of analysis. Can I grab it?
Yeah, the silver killing is probably reasonable. Everyone has to knock. Yay!
Alright. First thing I noticed with this sword is that it's fucking heavy. It is really, really heavy. It's short. It's a decent sized bit of rattan.
It's perfect.
It hasn't, the sides haven't been planed down. It has a thrusting tip, pretty chunky one. Built up a little bit there. Really heavy sword. There's not much shaping being done on the handle. There's a little bit of grooves where the fingers go. But that's really, really heavy. But what do you think of that? First impressions?
Old school. Riverhead.
Is that a trigger or a landing you've got on it?
It's got a trigger.
And you're using it on your lower fingers?
Oh, Jesus.
No, it rolls up.
It goes all the way up through. Yeah.
What do I think? I wouldn't use it.
What do I think?
Yeah.
So one thing I want to stress, I probably should have mentioned at the start, is that swords are uniquely individual. Every fighter's going to have their own preference. But I've sort of noticed it's one of those things that not everyone necessarily pays as much attention to as they should. And you may be able to get a lot of gains in your fighting by making a few modifications or adjustments to the tool of your trade, right? Well, I think relative to the swords that I use.
Depends what you use.
I mean, to that, yeah.
Yeah.
Weighs a ton.
Quite cool.
But I also find
Yeah,
this
so
a 2x4.
I'll grab a point here. What can you notice about the difference between these two and where
You
the
take the
scruff marks
stud
are?
nails out before you fight with it?
Oh, yeah. You can't have metal in it.
Clifford's are mainly on the bottom, and Daryl's there's more scruffs and marks on the top. What do you reckon that is?
What do you mean?
It's preferred range.
Once I say it, it'll
I'm
be
not
obvious.
going to answer.
No, rephrase your question.
Average height. That's average height. On average, Clifford's taller, so a right-handed snap comes in and hits the other person and marks up that edge. On average, Daryl, being shorter, comes in and when he hits, they're hitting on the top edge of the blade, both
from,
good
from,
with
because of rising.
no
Yeah.
tall person.
Yeah,
Short person.
yeah. All these shots are going to be tend to rising
have the
unless
chance
he's
of
jumping up doing.
They come down. Yeah. And so you
Yeah.
can see.
About the angle.
So if you get someone with 6'3" and all their marks on the thing, you go, their kingdom's big.
So I think
And on here.
Alfgar sword would pass inspection. There's no exposed rattan. I'm not sure about the weight. It might be really approaching the upper weight limit there. To 2.2 kilos.
1'4",
Yeah.
1'6",
178.
Pretty chunky.
1'7", 8".
Yeah, it's not.
Thrusting tip. That's good. What? That's a plastic tip, is it?
That's a rubber one.
Rubber
One
one.
that ones
Yeah.
you can buy.
Yeah.
That'll be a mandrake.
Yeah. Not
Thomas gave it to me.
not too many marks up the flat sides of the blade, which is good. You're not throwing flat.
Didn't realise kitchen was a contact sport.
Thank you for offering your sword up.
What you don't know about the kitchen?
Is that for the kneading the dough bit?
We talked about power transfer, optimal placing. Now, with my stick, things I can do to move that up. So you can change your stance. So I used to fight sword back with my smaller shield. I'm sword foot forward now, so that changes your effective range. It can change where your shots are landing. The length of the stick. So if you've got a long stick, but your shots are hitting down here, if you shorten your stick, you can move it up. Range and measure as well. So how you engage your opponent at what distance can affect that as well. And the selection of shots you throw. Pendulums and can sometimes hit really short. Molyneuxes you can get flicky towards the tip. Wraps can be right at range or really in close as well, depending on where you are. So those are things you can change to help with power transfer. Things like that. We'll move on a little bit on to construction. We haven't got long to go, maybe 10 minutes. I appreciate you all coming today. How does everyone determine what length of sword they want?
Swish. Should just not hit the dirt when I'm comfortably doing it in the middle of the thing. That's what I don't want to touch the grass.
Proper stance, yeah.
In proper stance.
I use a similar sort of method. I put it on the ground, and then if it touches the bottom of my hand, when it's extended, I'm not having to reach them. It's not up here. That's what I found. That's your method.
Yep.
Do you want to show the camera?
If I can get it to my nose, it's too long.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Because that I need to be able to effectively
Inside
come from here and block to here and still throw without catching myself or my shield in the process.
It's all very similar.
I used to have my sticks about a thrusting tip length longer. I shortened them when I changed to sword foot forward because I figured that stance gives me that extra range. I can shorten it, bring the balance point back, get better power transfer, faster turnover of certain shots, so like turnover cuts. You can get a really a small movement at the wrist is a big movement at the tip of the blade. That's a really fast cut. Really fast tip speed. If you've got a heavy sword or a tip heavy sword and you're trying to do that movement, you can be fighting against the tip of the blade with that particular shot. Other shots that can be more beneficial. We talked about thickness and weight already. Thrusting tips we've already talked about. Taping. How many layers of fibre tape has to be on a sword?
1.
It says 3 in the rules. 3 layers of fibre
Has
tape.
to be or can be?
Has to be. Minimum 3. The way I get that is I think it's about 1 over the front, 1 over the side, and then I wrap. But I overlap the wrap so that I get the three layers. Again, as I was talking before, more tape can add weight to your sword. Minimum tape. So I try to do as little tape as possible, but maximize how much use I get out of the tape. So I don't want it to. If you go the bare minimum, you might wear through the tape and have to add extra tape. But if you put too much on, so I'm trying to sort of balance how much tape. And the same thing goes for the hockey tape. So the coloured tape on the swords here is actually got a fair bit of weight in it. So when I wrap the sword, I do only maybe about a quarter of the tape overlaps when I'm doing the wrap. Is to minimise the amount of weight I put on it. Any questions on
Do
that?
you have any, when you're wrapping and overlapping, do you have a preference for starting at the bottom and working to the tip, or starting at the tip and working to the bottom?
I work from the tip to the bottom.
Okay, so your overlaps are going to be proud, so that if you thrust and slightly miss, it'll catch on the tape edge.
Because that way.
Yeah, because of the overlap, yeah.
I haven't noticed anything, but that's an interesting observation. Yeah, I can feel it now. You can just run your thumb.
Because I've always done it from the bottom outwards.
For that reason.
For that reason.
Yeah. So you've had experiences where it's caught.
No.
Just an observation.
Just an observation.
Yeah. I just ran my thumb there and I've just pulled the tape up.
Yeah.
Like that. straight away. Cool.
Pretty sure the frosted colour.
Yeah.
Well, it's not just thrusts, because you're throwing out, you're throwing material.
So that's all the construction of the blade and that. But another important thing of construction we kind of touched on a little bit is handles. How many people have picked up a sword that isn't yours, and you've just gone, oh god, what is that? Either it's not shaped at all, or it's got jagged edge, like corners on it, you know, like. So I've found.
Like that. Yeah.
I prefer to use a thinner handle. If anyone's ever done any hammering or like using a sledgehammer for a long period of time, when you're gripping the haft for a long period of time and then you let go, it sort of cramps your hands up. And I found with thick handles, or handles that don't have any shaping to them, really affects that. I've also found thicker handles sort of limits your ability to, like, you know, that versus that kind of thing, because it's sort of like how thick the handle is. Different people may have different experiences. This is sort of my experience. Thicker handles have limited my ability, you know, hitting the edge of a shield versus popping over the edge of a shield can be more difficult. And it's also how well your kit, your half gauntlet and your basket hilt all interact with the handle. So the way I shape my handles is similar to how they're done on here, but not as exaggerated. So they taper from the top to the bottom because there's a smaller gap. Your pinky finger is smaller than the other one. And on this side, they scallop in like an hourglass. The idea being is that the hourglass ridge at the top stops my hand from going too far. I get a nice narrow bit there. On some of them, the top bit of the hourglass is too high. When I've done it on the sander and then put the hilt on, it's just been slightly too big. So playing around, I usually mark them out beforehand. So you can see on this long sword here, I've marked out this is where I want the handle to go, and these two lines here is where I'm going to remove material to. That's the thickness that I found that I prefer. I've not really fought with a two-handed weapon before, so I may find that handle's too thin when I go to use this and have to adjust it, wearing gauntlets and that. You know, it's all a learning experience. But this is my first attempt, and that's what I'm gonna.
Have you got some offcuts you can practice planing on with your gauntlets on?
Yeah, a couple of little one here and some other ones at home and that. If you look at something like what Rob does at the second time, cuts a few grooves, and then there's a little bit of shaping, a little bit of the hourglass sculpting. Yeah, so people want to look at what.
How I do mine is similar to that.
Yeah.
Kind of a bouge in the middle that fits in the cup of your palm, and then the narrow point for the fingers at the top, and narrow point for the fingers at the bottom for that snap. So you still got the false mass of the handle in the center, not huge, just enough that it cups into your hand.
Yeah.
To fill it as you swing through.
I've seen people who don't shape their hilt. They just whack don't shape the hilt. They just put the hilt on and away they go. You know, with a 40 mil diameter piece of rattan, and then just.
That wouldn't happen. You wouldn't happen to be referring to Sir Brucey, would you?
No.
No, he never.
I'm not in the business of naming and shaming here. It's just an observation.
It's just, you know, shaping came later.
Yeah.
When people started, like years and years ago, no one had a hand grip. Everybody thought that just the round stick as it came.
Yeah, right. I've seen people cut specific grooves for their thumb or for their index finger.
Trigger finger. Groove.
But the rest of the handle is as is. They've just got the groove. Whatever works for you. You know, the types of shot you throw, the type of stance you have, things like that. Now, once I've shaped the handle, you'll notice with all my swords, they've all got tennis racket grips on them. I've found tennis racket grips to be very useful. It stops if your hand gets. Some people get sweaty hands. It can help prevent that. I like the feel in my hand as well. you do notice that if you do have just raw wood, over time that'll get really smooth and the sweat and oil from your hand will sort of soften that up. You don't tend to get splinters or anything like that generally. And with tennis racket grips, there's a couple of different varieties. So they range from sort of these cloth-based ones, like you see on here, right through to these rubbery ones, which are a bit more tacky. I prefer the tacky ones. And similar to when you're wrapping these, you can buy them in 3 packs for $20 at Rebel Sports. So they're really cheap. Give them all different colours as well. So my heraldry is black, white, and blue. So I have a black, white blade and a blue handle. Just something a little extra. And the same deal. I overlap these so that the overlaps sort of sit flat. They sit together rather than like that. So I don't get any ridges on the handle. So that's how I do my handles.
And the modern fancy tennis grips have a thinning so they overlap less.
Oh really?
They overlap
Yeah,
flat.
they're thicker on one side than the other.
So you
One edge.
So you put it into, you match them up.
When you're shaping your handles, you can go too thin. So I have seen very recently a person who made their handle a bit too thin and it snapped like this, but where the handle is. That can also be, if you've got a really heavy piece of rattan, a handle that you used on a lighter bit, the thickness might be too thin for that bit of rattan because the weight and the forces going through the stick will affect how thick you do the handle. But these are kiln dried ones, which is the one that snaps with it. That sword has probably the thinnest handle I've used. I've not broken a handle or anything yet, but I think that's probably approaching the limit.
Candidate.
Yeah, it's if it's going to go, it's probably that one. Yeah. Right, last session. What do people do with their sticks when they become unserviceable or pulped up?
Cut 'em up.
Saw them for splits or saw them for trading.
On the mantle.
Yeah, I go through so many sticks that I just throw them away.
Yeah. So I've just got a couple examples here of what I've done with swords. So one sword that was pulped up, I turned it into a dead hand. So I just cut the blade off and kept the handle. I had a spare basket hilt. So if you get armed in a tournament, you can still, you know.
So I might do that with my original basketball. No good for fighting anymore.
I got the idea from Sir Oz actually. I saw him at a Crown tourney and he put this on the side of the list field. I'm like, that's actually a really good idea. So I've got a dead hand, I keep that in my kit bag. Another thing you can do is I made a couple of daggers out of 2 other swords where the sort of the middle to the end of it was pulped and not good, but the bottom and the handle is still perfectly fine. So I've just cut them down into daggers. So I just made these 2. I think this one was still a bit pulpy towards the ends, and it ended up a lot shorter than I hoped. So that's good.
Like axes and maces.
Yeah.
Is the rear of that actually a thrusting tip?
Yes. That's really good.
No, that one.
No.
Okay.
Just this one. Because it's got the black on my taping is the edge or the striking surfaces. So there, but not here. This cross guard is just some offcuts of rattan that I drilled a hole through the stick and then attached it with dowel and taped it on. This one is actually 2 bits of wax hardened leather with foam in the middle that I've just taped together to make the rondels.
No bottom out.
Yeah, because any quillions, cross guards and things like that have to be the same thickness as a blade so they don't go through people's. Yeah, so 32 mil minimum for these kinds of things. That's the end.
Can you layer rattan together to make a dagger?
What do you mean by layer?
Yeah. Stack it.
Don't think so.
Make a thick
Yeah,
dagger.
Can?
You probably can.
One of the things I do with some of my old sticks is occasionally I make a war gladius where you get 2 short dead sticks and you give them to people for war if they're really, really fresh, because anyone can figure out how to do that. So 2 dead sticks that lost.
So it has enough mass that I can actually hit with it.
So
and it has
the bit of rattan that this came out of was a 9-foot piece. And I got that sword, this, and then this little offcut here. So I'm not really sure. I might turn it into an axe or a mace or something.
Typically, if I'm fighting
I
a
don't know.
slave in a war,
No, I mean having a split
and then
hand
I
to
think
make it.
I think amongst all of the sticks here, I have every stick I've ever used.
Split
Some
hand
degree.
other than
Like,
thickness
there's not much
or
left of this one.
Oh, it
anything
just
on
makes
it
the
to make the blade.
makes
I
it
see
look
using
right.
it as a double height for the
Yeah.
Give it
that
a
long back edge on a sack.
You get past
As
that.
well as
piece
I
over
do
top
the
of the
notch
handle
and
and
the
then one
tennis
under
grip.
it.
But one of the
That
reasons
gives
I
it
do
that
the
shape.
notch
This thing
is that
some
there's a
few
point
blades, if
where
you
I
look at
go,
maybe like
I'm
the sinker,
I'm out of range.
you know, the big
This guy-
triangular blade
this
where
guy's
you'd need
stuck
to
in
fan
back
it at the back and
really well.
yeah, sacks
So
where
I find it,
tall
Yeah.
and long.
but then I
Yeah.
throw my
Yeah.
hand to the
So
back
to,
of the
to make it look
Okay,
right,
yeah.
and you go, that's a
to
sack.
get
And
a
it's,
surprise extra.
Well, it also
Yeah.
gives it enough.
And
enough
then-
it would give you the
when
mass
I'm
on
back
that
in
back
the
So
day,
when
edge.
you,
So,
you
I
yeah.
want to crawl my hand and find it instantly.
Yeah, so it's like the home keys.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
That's not how it's going on.
As opposed to this little tap on the side,
Yeah.
and it goes clunk, and you're like, damn, was that
Yeah.
a
The
main?
point of that notch.
So the one I've got
So
a
that'd really
really
be
long
nice.
as well. So it has a
First,
bit more.
longsword,
Yeah,
full handle.
feel.
What? To it?
You want that much.
Those
more
is
tackling.
like
Yeah, so I modeled that off
rectangle for
one
a
that
mace
one
head
that John has,
around
and
the
that's
outside
what wings
to
hold
get that.
one, and it's
that
about
crack
the same
and then
length as
foam
what we
under
use.
it.
Yeah.
But like
I've got
that,
told Luke Clifford that he picked up one of mine and went, oh my god.
yeah, because you want
Trust me.
because you want that that leverage, right?
Yeah, see where you put your hand?
Yeah.
Does that suck?
Yeah,
Takes
well,
that
I was
awesome?
just worried about
but-
reducing how much blade I had. Because if I go another, don't worry about it.
It went not an issue.
You're not
at
going to
all.
be hitting them right down
Plain
there
sides
between
this
them.
way,
Yeah.
split it,
And
pull it
you've
out,
still got exactly the same
tape it all
range
up
of
so it
thrusting.
comes
Because
up,
if
point
you've got,
on the end, and then you have
you're
to
going
break
to throw
the
a
surface
thrust
on
like
each side of
this,
that.
You smash your hands
Okay.
together.
you bring your hands
Yeah,
together.
like
Beautiful,
It's-
big enough to really
So-
pull apart on the wall.
You've got-
You
Yeah.
actually go out and you go,
You don't lose
that
anything
is
by
just
having
something
that
really
really
big.
Yeah,
You got it. You got it.
You
enough.
want all the
Under
scissors.
sides, so you can grab the edge
You've got a better scissor.
Oh, yes, is that what that?
and
Yeah,
yank it,
yeah.
pop them in the face, or
So
pull
yeah,
it,
you want, whereas if you're here,
and then
it's a
be
little
able to
bit-
come up and just whack
here it just
and
moves better.
get enough,
Yeah.
enough mass to
Moments of
crack them in the
moments of a
face.
force.
That's a belt.
Moments of a force is the word.
Yeah.
Physics term.
Actually, there you go.
That's
Too
what I'm
heavy.
looking for,
Crap.
Oh yeah, that's what
Because your
the
opponent's going too heavy.
shaft of it
even-
really, really light. So a really
Mark
thin,
your
light
blade
piece for his
down
hand.
to about
And
here,
then the tip
still then come forward
head
like a
is
recastle.
There is a limit.
There is a
I
limit.
wouldn't go
Kind
on.
of wish
Yeah.
I could,
But yeah.
Wow.
Over the top of the shield.
Yes.
Crunk.
I have a piece of rattan about that.
Well, you just don't know. You know, if
Every
you,
century
swords for
of
me.
two-handed
Yeah,
swords,
it
there's
is
more
for you.
hands.
Yeah.
yeah, pretty much.
As long as